Today, we begin the player season recaps for the Pacers 2021-22 season, starting with the young bigs, Jalen Smith, Isaiah Jackson, and Terry Taylor. Going to look back at their season, what it meant for the Pacers, what it means going forward, how they'll fit in the future of this team, all on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News, and today we are beginning the player season recap series for the Pacers. We did Rick Carlisle last Friday with Kevin Bowen from 1070 The Fan. We're going to do every player breaking down their season with the team, what they did well, what they did poorly, where they need to grow, what their future is with this franchise, which is perhaps the most important thing for a team coming off of 25 wins. In the past, I have done every player for their own episode. I don't think that's as necessary this summer with the Pacers having 3 important draft picks, money to spend in free agency, lots of decisions to make. I think I can do more podcasts on the team building side than on the looking back side. I've split them up into 9 groups of players through the season, sorting from starting guards to backup wings to young bigs to guys who played less than 5 games. But today we're doing the young bigs group. So today we'll do one segment on Jalen Smith, one segment on Isaiah Jackson, and one segment on Terry Taylor, the young bigs. Goga Batadze actually made a different group, given that he was on the team, has been in the league for longer than those guys. So let's just start with Jalen Smith. We'll jump right in and go through these guys. Didn't really have any rhyme or reason to the order. Just wanted to do these 3 guys. It made sense to do them all in the same. So Jalen Smith's season was so interesting for a million reasons. The most important one being the complete flip from player impact he had from Phoenix to Indiana, going from a bit player who only played when there was injuries, despite one big stretch for him when the Suns had some injuries and COVID concerns, was basically nothing. For Phoenix, came to Indiana, was immediately a much better player, an impact guy in the rotation every day. Can't keep him off the floor. Just such a strange season to evaluate for a guy like that who played, he played more minutes with the Pacers, but 543 minutes with the Pacers this season, right? Prior to that with Phoenix, he only had played 538 minutes, right? He played more with Indiana than his whole career before. So really tough to judge his season. But from a Pacers perspective, obviously, we'll go good about season before bad about season. He just showed everything he could do that the Suns were not having him do. Big one was the three-pointer to me. Going from a guy in Phoenix who shot 23% from deep on 56 attempts to canning 37% of 83 attempts. And by the way, there's still a chance that number doesn't stabilize. That's not a ton of attempts, but to be that level of three-point shooter was obviously a huge boon to his game. But in general, Jalen Smith's finishing once he got to the Pacers was just way better. 63% inside the arc. Around the basket, he was much better. 79% from 0 to 3 feet with the Pacers, and only 70% with the Suns this year, 67% last year, right? So he got better finishing from basically everywhere. His free throw rate got a little bit better this season, right? He just found ways to be more efficient. His true shooting percentage with the Pacers was 63%. That is blistering hot. He found ways to be more efficient and carve stuff up, and his movement in general, is pretty good and smooth. It's not necessarily well-timed necessarily all the time, and his defensive instincts are a little lacking, but his movement is good and his shot is good, and being an above-the-break three-point shooter is a big threat. So he just completely evolved once he switched teams. And if you look at his per 36 stats, it's almost jarring that even those jump up a ton. Those can sort of deflate thanks to the minutes, but even after getting traded per 36, scoring goes up by over 3 points, fouls go down, turnovers go down, blocks stay the same, steals stay the same, assists double, defensive rebounds go up. Like, he just got better when the opportunity came and he was able to play with a growing team. So a lot to like about Jalen Smith this season. The bad part of Jalen Smith's season, I think his defense still needs some work for sure, especially on fives specifically. His nickname being Sticks in Phoenix, and that didn't really carry to the Pacers, but was largely because of his frame being not so large. And when he specifically had to bulk up and defend a 5, I did not think he particularly did a great job this season. And that's something I think that every player can get better at and improve at as they gain muscle. We'll see that with Isaiah Jackson potentially. We'll talk about him later today too, as something that could be important as he bulks up. And his movement that I talked about on offense sort of translates to defense for Jalen, and he was guarding fours a lot. Very strange situation he was in because I'm viewing him as a 5 for this exercise, but really he played a lot of 4. But he, defensively just leaves a lot to be desired. When he was on the floor, the Pacers' defensive rating this season was 119.1, and it dropped by over 3 points when he sat. So despite his awesome offensive game, his defense definitely needs a lot of work, especially on the ball on those bulkier 5s. I think that's something he obviously knows he needs to work on. And as a young player, that it's not expected that you're able to have the strength to match up with longtime NBA bigs, but certainly a weakness for him. The other bad thing about his season, I use that term sparingly here, is that he probably played his way out of Indiana. I talked about this on the show where he talked about his free agency at Exit Interviews. You can listen to that last Thursday's podcast. Hear what Jalen Smith said directly about his own free agency. And for him, a lot of it's going to be fit and opportunity. And there's a chance the Pacers could get him that fit and opportunity, but the Pacers are limited in what they can offer him at 4.6 something million next year. And that's probably not going to be enough for him unless they can offer him like a starting role in 30 minutes a game. Not that extreme, but a very large and significant role. So he probably played himself out of Indiana's money range. He might only be worth about that much in next year, but he might, you don't pay a guy for the first year. The life of the deal, you want to get the total value there. And if he grows beyond that, then all of a sudden he becomes, maybe a 3 for 15 or a 4 for 25 or 4 for 30 guy. And then the Pacers just can't afford him, even by the smallest of amounts, they can't afford him. And if you're Jalen Smith, after the Suns declined your option, obviously you want to the opportunity, like you said, because he doesn't want to be in that situation again where he's not playing like he was in Phoenix. But also the money's important because he lost out on half of his rookie scale deal. So I think the Pacers could keep him. We'll talk about his free agency later. But he played himself potentially out of Indiana with his good play. And I'm going to do one stat that tells it all for everybody for these player season recaps. And I mean, look, there's a lot of stuff that got better and worse for Jalen Smith. I talked about his per 36s, but the biggest one, the 3-point percentage to me. Like 23% with the Suns this season, 23.5% with the Suns his rookie season. Nothing about him projected that he was a good shooter. Even his free throw percentage doesn't show that he'd be like an awesome shooter. But with the Pacers, knockdown, over the top of guys when he was open, sometimes off the bounce, although not very often. Like he just canned threes. And being a stretch 4, something the Pacers never had. That's why their offensive rating was so much better with him in the game. 5 points better per 100 possessions on offense the Pacers were with Jalen Smith on the floor than off of it in the games that he appeared in. So, clearly that 3-point percentage, both for him as a scorer and for the team in general in terms of spacing, because he did play the 4 a lot, had a lot of value. So that meant, one, he is now a refined offensive player who is providing value in the NBA and is no longer just a bench guy. But 2, he can play 2 positions. He was playing 5 and 4 a lot for the Pacers. He played with Isaiah Jackson quite a bit, played with Terry Taylor, who we'll talk about today quite a bit, played with Goga fairly often, right? Like those combinations add value to him. He can play 2 positions. He can be a stretch 4. In fact, he was a little better defending 4s than 5s most of the time because he's a better mover than strength guy. That was a more natural position for him. Despite him being 7 feet tall, he might be more natural at the 4 than the 5, at least given his build this past season, right? 6'10", 215, right? He weighs less than I do, and he's 6'10". So that is the 3-point percentage tells a lot about his season because it showed that he fully evolved into that 4 that he could be, because he could move pretty well with Phoenix but couldn't do anything inside. They have a more offensive or inside offensive system for their bigs, and it requires a little more decision making. He just needed some more free flowing behind the arc kind of stuff, and he really showed that he can do that with the Pacers. Some areas for growth for him. One is that strength. Obviously, if he gets better and bulkier, he'll be a better defender. He'll be able to play the 5 if called upon to play 2 positions with the Pacers or with another team. I think that's an obvious one. I think that's true for every guy we'll talk about today. But in general, young bigs need to get stronger. And passing is one that, his decision making in space, I wouldn't call it a weakness. He never really did it. But I wouldn't say he's like a solid passer or solid reader of the game. Per game, 0.8 assists with the Pacers in 25 minutes. Per 36, his assist number is barely over 1. Like he is not throwing anybody open. He's barely even moving the ball to the next available player. So passing, something he's got to work on, and that's just a general read the game, watch the film kind of stuff. Maybe he'll never be even a high level or quality passer, but like Isaiah Jackson even was a better passer than him. Terry Taylor, who we'll talk about later, just to compare him to 2 guys, like Terry Taylor was over 2 assists per 36. And no one's considering Terry Taylor a bomb passer or anything. So passing, definitely something Jalen Smith needs to work on, and his future with the team is the last one we'll do for every player. Look, I alluded to this earlier. It's just hard to say. I think that it is way more likely that Jalen Smith is not on the Pacers next year. I think he probably got priced out. And I think there's enough teams that will have space or the MLE that would be willing to use it on a young, promising big, that it will be hard for the Pacers to compete with offers, right? Detroit and OKC are the two obvious ones, young and growing, and will have space. The Spurs will have space. Those are some clear ones. But even a team like Houston, they have Alperen Şengün, for example. I almost just said the wrong name, which is why I chuckled there. But they don't have like a ton of depth at young bigs right now. And maybe they draft Chad, or maybe any of these teams draft Chad, and maybe one of these teams draft Jalen Duren. Who knows? There's other young bigs on the market. But if not, there are a lot of teams that would have the resources and desire to add a young big with some upside. And that will make the Pacers keeping Jalen Smith very hard. If you're the Pacers and you'd like to keep Jalen Smith, you would like all the teams that are young and need centers to draft a center. And then you want all the rest of the teams with space to use their resources on other stuff pretty quickly so that you can say, Jalen, we will give you 25 minutes a game on this 1-year deal with a player option on the second year if you come back at this $4.7 million number that they're limited on and offering him in year one, and just pray that he takes it. That's the Pacers' best chance. But again, that requires a lot lining up for them, which is really tough. And if that does happen, then you're squeezing out Isaiah Jackson or Goga Batadze. So there's a lot to consider, but it does seem way more likely than not that he's not with the Pacers next year, but not impossible, especially if the Pacers make it a priority in terms of other bigs no longer being on the team. If Miles is gone, for example, there's more minutes for bigs, obviously. Who they draft could be a consideration in all this. So Jalen Smith, definitely a good season with the Pacers. Very promising, big up-and-comer, was one of the highlight players down the stretch after the trade deadline for them, but probably played himself out of Indiana in that stretch with some stuff to work on. His future will be fascinating to watch because it's so hard to compare a guy in two different markets to see how that growth went. Let's move on to player number 2. Let's do Terry Taylor second, Isaiah Jackson third today. Again, no rhyme or reason for these decisions. Just the order I feel like going in before we start talking about Terry Taylor's rookie season with the Indiana Pacers, though. Let's talk about the good folks over at PrizePicks. Are you looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA? Then you have got to try the award-winning PrizePicks app. It's daily fantasy made easy. I love it. I know you will too. What's easy to use? You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections for many stats, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry. It's just you versus the PrizePicks projected numbers. Entries can be made in a minute or less. Super easy. They're safe. They offer fast withdrawals. They have an award-winning app, and they offer a ton of options, right? Any prop you can think of. Points, rebounds, steals, they got it. Mixed sport entries, so you can do MLB with NBA playoffs, for example. And they don't just offer NBA and MLB. They got college football, NFL, soccer, MMA, college hoops when that's going on, and more for a limited time. PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. Get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point, but you got to use the code NBA. That's right, exclusive offer for Locked On fans. Sign up today. Use the code NBA on PrizePicks for $50 for free if a player in your first entry scores a single point. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On Now, hear from our local experts on every game going on in the playoffs, including Nets Celtics. Nets season about to be over. It's in the fourth quarter as I'm speaking to you, with the Nets down 3 late in that game. You can get it all on Locked On Now. Let's talk about Terry Taylor's rookie season with the Pacers. And like Jalen Smith, a little bit of a tale of two seasons. But the Terry Taylor tale of two seasons is because the first half of the season, he wasn't on the team at all. He wasn't on any NBA team and really proved himself with the Mad Ants. I went to the first Mad Ants game they played in Cambridge this season. They played the Canton Charge. And, I think Dwayne Washington had like over 30 points, and Justin Anderson had a pretty good game that night. And Isaiah Jackson was there. There was a lot of stories for me to keep up with from a Pacers perspective. And I walked away the most impressed with Terry Taylor because he had like 20 rebounds and a billion offensive rebounds, and they won by like 40 points. And Terry Taylor was awesome. So I wrote about his rebounding that night. 2 weeks later, they signed him to the two-way deal. And I was just amazed, not necessarily because I didn't think it could translate, but just, 6'5" guys, sometimes bigs just dominate in the G League, and that doesn't really translate. Like TJ Leaf put up monster G League numbers. Jakar Sampson put up monster G League numbers. Goga's put up monster G League numbers. Bigs have that ability, if they read the game at a decent level, to dominate the G League. But Terry Taylor brought it to the NBA. Perfect translation, which doesn't always happen. And the reason I was a little, not surprised, but just didn't necessarily know the extent that Terry Taylor could bring those skills to the NBA is he's 6'5", but he is just a wonderful, wonderful big man at his height. And it's really unbelievable how good he is at rebounding. And when you talk about what was good about his rookie season, the rebounding is where you start, right? More offensive rebounds per game than defensive is crazy. It's absolutely crazy for a 6'5" player to lead the Pacers and be very, very high up in the NBA rankings in offensive rebound rate at 14.6% is just insane. Like when he's out there, almost 1 in 5 pacer misses, he's grabbing them. Like that is an insane percentage, especially for a 6'5" guy. For NBA reference, like for the whole league, guys who had above a 14.9 offensive rebound percentage: Steven Adams, Mitchell Robinson, Clint Capella, Finn. That's the list. That's it. Even stud rebounders you think of like Gobert and Pirtle and Beef Stew and Jared Allen, all those guys were percentage points below what Terry Taylor was able to do on the glass. Just a wonderful rebounder, and he's able to convert that into good finishing around the rim, right? If he could just get the offensive board but was stuck, it wouldn't matter. But he shoots 76% from 0 to 3 feet. Decent enough kick-out passer. That's something Tom Hankins and the G League staff were working on with him a lot this season. Wonderful, wonderful rebounder. Now, unfortunately, outside of right around the basket, he's got some work to do, and that's where the bad about the season stuff comes from everybody. That sounds so harsh. I might need to change the name of how I describe that. But for Terry Taylor, there wasn't a lot of ball skill, again, outside of that 5-foot range. Very rarely did he put it on the floor and get past guys. He had a few nice moves that make me think, yeah, he's got some dribble packages in him when he develops as a player and gets more on-ball reps, but it wasn't there all the time this season. Just in general, his floor game, his transition game has some work to do. But the hustle and the drive is there, that he can run a good lane in transition. His just on-ball instincts and passing in general are definitely a weak point for him. And if he gets really good at the passing, especially out of the post after an offensive rebound, that could be a very valuable source of offense for the Pacers. Those kick-out threes can be super valuable. And something else is just defense in general. And look, this is where Terry Taylor's whole career might be tough to kind of evaluate and put into perspective. Wonderful offensive rebounder, gets rebounds over dudes way taller than him, finishes around them, good screener, moves around the court extremely well. But when you're 6'5" and those are your skills, you're going to play 5 and 4 a lot. A small ball 4 at 6'5" in the NBA, that's acceptable, but you're still most likely going to be smaller than the guy you're guarding. And at the 5, he is just way, way undersized in terms of height. That's why I think he gets more offensive rebounds than defensive is, on the other end, all of a sudden the other center's going for an offensive board. He's giving up that height in a way that, is a little different than on the offensive glass, where sometimes teams are trying to run in transition or getting back or whatever. It's easier to be a short guy who's a beast on the offensive glass than defensive. So all that to say, I think defense will be a struggle for Terry Taylor a lot in his career, unless he gets enough floor game to be able to be a 3 in a lot of lineups, because he'll always be going against guys much taller than him, always going against guys who just can kind of turn and shoot over him. So he can get really strong maybe and push him off the block, or he could just become more mobile and defend perimeter guys more often. Sure, those are great ways that he could become a more impactful player, and I would not put it past him given how he grew as a rookie. But his defense was certainly a weakness because of his size limitations, and that's going to be something he can't work on his size, but that's going to be something he has to work on in his game, is his defensive instincts in general, if he wants to stay on the floor and guard other positions other than the 5. Certainly something he could do. One stat that tells it all for him, do I need to say it, is his rebound rate. I mean, unbelievable numbers. Just ridiculous. On the Pacers in general, think of Sabonis was on the team this year, right? One of the best rebounders in franchise history. And he even didn't sniff Terry Taylor, his offensive rebound rate. Sabonis' offensive rebound rate, a good offensive rebounder, 10.4%. Terry Taylor's, again, 14.6%. Just insane how good Terry Taylor is at reading his teammates' shots off the rim, getting in the right position, and his second jump is so crucial, right? A lot of guys can jump up and tip it. Not a lot of guys can jump up and get it after they jump up and tip it. So that is an insane offensive rebounding rate. I mean, I already put it into perspective for the whole league, but that just suggests so much about what he can be. That skill will always be there for him. As long as Terry Taylor's got his athleticism, he'll be able to get on an NBA floor. And at only 22 years old, that's something he'll be able to do for a while, and why the Pacers ultimately ended up converting his deal and keeping him on the floor. So that stat just tells it everything about his game and why he was so valuable, is he got the Pacers extra possessions. And going back to a podcast from last week where I talked about some unique strategies teams are using in the playoffs, Memphis is one of those teams. I mentioned Steven Adams leading the league in offensive rebound rate a few minutes ago. Their strategy is based a lot on, we're going to have more possessions than our opponent every game. And so you look at Terry Taylor, if you want to copy the Memphis blueprint a little bit, Terry Taylor could be a key part of that in getting the Pacers extra possessions, so they don't necessarily have to be as efficient on a per possession basis, but it can instead be a team that just dominates having the ball all the time. An area for growth for Terry Taylor, you go back to his bad things about the season, just most of his on-ball skills and his defense needs some work. But I put on-ball skills just because, if he could handle it a little bit, he could play the 3, and that would allow him immediately to have an easier impact on the defensive end. So just a little bit of either a three-point shot, and he only took one a game and only made 31.6%, right? Only 38 total threes this season. If he works on his three all offseason, right, if he goes through the Edmund Sumner growth pattern from deep, that'd be awesome. That'd be huge for Terry Taylor's career, because if he gets either the ability to put it on the floor with two dribbles and make a play, or an outside shot, all of a sudden he becomes a guy you can play at the three, and then becomes a unique three and a much better defender just because he's going against guys his size. So his future with the team, he is technically not a free agent this summer, but could be. His contract for next season, his partial guarantee of over $600,000 becomes fully guaranteed on July 10th. I find it very hard to believe the Pacers would prefer $1 million in spending than having Terry Taylor on the roster, and that $1 million is the difference between the fully guaranteed Terry Taylor contract and the partial guarantee that he already has. There's literally nothing that $1 million can get you. Like the minimum salary for an undrafted free agent next year is about that, and there's no way the Pacers would prefer a random undrafted free agent on their roster over a guy that was quite good for them as a rookie last year and is only 22 years old. So technically, Terry Taylor's a free agent. There is really, I have not thought of a good reason to let him go, unless that $1 million is like the difference between Bradley Beal signing like a cheapo deal with your team or him not. There is no reason. That's just a made up scenario. Just like the only reason you would clear $1 million is if it got you a slam dunk thing. And again, there are other ways to get $1 million other than waiving Terry Taylor. So technically, he could be a free agent this summer, but there are no pros to me in waiving him that they couldn't do another way. And there are cons in that you're losing a very talented player that he would probably be claimed on waivers, honestly, because he has 2 more non-guaranteed years on his contract. So technically a free agent, but no reason to not bring him back if you're the Indiana Pacers next season. Let's go to Isaiah Jackson last, the second first-round pick for the Pacers this year. An absolute darling in my heart because of his unique skill set. Lots to talk about his rookie season with the Pacers and what his future could hold with this team. But before we talk about Isaiah Jackson, let's talk about the good folks over at BetOnline.net, your number one source for all betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news this season, including the basketball playoffs, where the Nets are now out, and the start of Major League Baseball season, all in full swing. And BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs to esports and more. For example, on there for the NBA tomorrow, they've got the Heat favored by 7 in a closeout game against the Hawks. Grizzlies favored by 6 against Minnesota. Great series. Looking forward to all those games tomorrow. And the Suns favored against the Pelicans in a stunningly even series. You can get all those lines over at betonline.net. Head over to their website today or use your mobile device to sign up and learn more about the trends in the action over at BetOnline. BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day, closing out our player season recaps for the Pacers Young Bigs with Isaiah Jackson, the 22nd pick in the 2021 NBA Draft. What a player. Look, I am really high on Isaiah Jackson. It is so rare that guys have the gazelle running ability as bigs is usually a good indicator to me of good quality skill, good finisher already, crazy athleticism and the lob threat, good defender at multiple positions already. It's going to be insane how easy it is to have a guy like that on the floor. You can play in multiple positions, beast on defense, right? Vertical threat is showing off its utility in the playoffs and for many teams all season long. Crazy good player to me. He will be a crazy good player. So Isaiah Jackson's going to be fascinating. And when I talk about the thing that was good about his season, you can go a lot of ways, and that vertical spacing was a big part of it, right? One of the best in-game dunkers the Pacers have had in a long time. But defense is where it starts for me. And look, advanced stats are what they are. But, for a guy who has a block rate rivaling Miles Turner's, right? Miles Turner's block percentage this season, 8.3%. He usually leads the league or is close to it with somewhere between like 7 and 9. Isaiah Jackson's block rate this season, 8.4%, higher than Miles Turner, right? He can jump out of the gym. And something Isaiah Jackson does well on defense is he can test three-point shots really well. He blocks threes much better than Turner does. Turner's better around the rim, but Isaiah Jackson can guard perimeter players because his length's really long. He's super athletic, so he can get up and get those crazy far from the basket blocks. That's one of his defensive stats that just jumps out. And then his steal percentage was the third best on the Pacers. And one of the guys ahead of him was Gabe York, which doesn't count because he only played 2 games. Halliburton had a better steal percentage than Isaiah Jackson, and that's it. Isaiah Jackson had a better steal rate than TJ McConnell, Chris Duarte, Lance Stevenson, guys who are good at jumping passing lanes and reading a defense. Advanced stats like that project him to be an awesome elite level defender going forward. And his defense was already really good. And I remember after they drafted him, they were doing the post-draft press conference, and Pacers leaders and decision makers were saying, yeah, I think he can guard 1 through 5. And then in training camp, you had some players saying, he's been really impressive on defense. Maybe he can guard 1 through 5. And the whole time, me as a skeptic of rookies in general was kind of like, they're just doing the, rookie promotion training camp thing. No, he really probably can guard 1 through 5, at least pretty soon. He's mobile enough to do it. He's got to get a little better at the pattern recognition and timing of the game, but he is already close to that level as an NBA defender. Fantastic defensive player. Now, something bad about his season, and something with that, reading the game and pattern recognition on defense, his fouling. Very bad, right? Took him off the floor all the time. It's a reason his minutes per game finished at 15, despite having 15 starts that should have inflated his minutes, right? Barely over 500 minutes on the season because he fouled so often and kept him off the floor. 6.1 fouls per 36 minutes, right? On an average game that Isaiah Jackson plays 36 minutes, in theory, he would be fouling out, right? Like, that is a ton of fouls. The second highest on the Pacers in fouls per 36 was Goga at 5.3, and then it was Lance at 4.3, right? Like, that, no one being over 4 is a lot, and Isaiah Jackson was over 6, right? The fouls are really bad, and some of them are that he knows what he's supposed to do on defense, and he's so athletic and speedy that he tries to do it anyway, even though he's late, and then he fouls a guy, or he's just being so aggressive because he knows what he's capable of that he fouls a guy. It is stuff that he knows he can contain. He's talked about staying down on shot fakes. He's talked about being in better position. I think he can fix it. He reads the game very well on the end of the floor, but he was terrible about it this season, and it did a lot to tell the story of his season. One stat that tells it all for him. Look, I went through the defensive stats, so I'll get creative here and mix it up. His true shooting percentage tells me a lot about Isaiah Jackson, because when you think of Isaiah Jackson, you think of the stuff I've already described. Awesome defender, speedy, vertical spacing, 61% true shooting. That is awesome. An awesome efficiency, despite not having a 3-ball, not looking like this awesome threat from the free throw line, because he just finishes everything, right? Inside the paint, electric player. 68% around the basket with pretty high difficulty shots at times. Decent in the paint at 44%, right? Just because he takes so many of his shots as easy twos, he's very efficient. So despite not having really much of a jump shot, he only took 16 threes the whole season. He can still be very efficient with no free throws either, because he's such a good finisher around the basket, and because he's able to change the geometry of the game by being able to jump higher than everybody else. There were a lot of possessions where the offense could have been throw it higher on the basket and Isaiah Jackson will score. And the Pacers figured that out at times this season, and it worked very well. And it made him very impressive but on that end of the floor. And I think that, again, I talk a lot about his defense being the thing, but that kind of tells a lot of the story of his season to me, that he was able to be an efficient offensive player as a rookie just because he was such a talented player around the basket with his leaping ability. The Pacers' offensive rating actually 3 points per 100 possessions better with Isaiah Jackson on the floor than off this season, because of that ability around the basket, because of what it opened up for them, that dimension that they didn't have when he was on the floor. That said, the flip side of true shooting percentage telling the story of his season and him being able to be on the floor with that good defense, he's got to get some sort of jumper. He's got to get some sort of threat more than 5 feet from the basket, I think. Because then, look, I've defended the idea that he can be a 4 for one plain reason. I think if you can guard a guy, you can play that position. Like, you don't want Isaiah Jackson handling the ball, even though he could guard a 1, but Isaiah Jackson can guard 4s, no problem. So he can play the 4 at any time. That said, I understand the limitations that would cause from a spacing perspective. If Isaiah Jackson even had a decent mid-range shot or a floater, a 10-foot threat, then he could play the 4 all the time, no problem. Right? We just talked about Jalen Smith earlier in the show, and he was able to play the 4 because he had the shot and he was a mobile defender. Isaiah Jackson, who is a much better defender, would be, if he had the 3, would be in that same way, a guy who you can play at the 4 and the 5 very easily if he added a 3-pointer. And I talk about Jalen Smith being 6'10", 215. Isaiah Jackson is 6'10", 206. Got to get stronger to defend those 5s in the paint. If he doesn't have that 3, he'll be playing the 5 more than the 4, and he'll need to add that strength down low. Definitely something for him going forward. Future with the team, not a free agent, on a rookie scale deal. A lock to be on the team next year. 2 team options. After that, they'll pick up his third-year team option this summer, assuming he is not traded. I don't know why he would be. I just have to include that. So his future with the team has to be a rotation big next year. Here's the thing I'll say after talking about Jalen Smith. I personally would much rather have Isaiah Jackson as a rotation big next year than Jalen Smith, if that's a consideration the Pacers have to make, or if they have to say, if Jalen Smith's camp says, hey, is Isaiah going to be on the team next year? If he's not, we'll take that cheapo deal, If I'm the Pacers, I'm saying, no, we're keeping Isaiah for sure. We're giving him the playing time, right? So I think he'll be a rotation big next year for the Pacers. Even if they try to go back to being a playoff level team, I think he'll be a backup 4 or 5 for them because he already has a lot of abilities and adds some dimensions to the game that they don't have elsewhere. And going forward, he can be that guy or even a starter, right? His defensive abilities mean that he could be a starting level big in not in the not too distant future. So his role specifically could depend on what goes on with some other guys. If Goga's back, if Miles is back, or if Miles has a longer contract, whatever. O'Shea Brissett's return to the team, like a lot of factors will decide what Isaiah Jackson's role is on the Pacers next year and long term. But I think he is a lock to be in the rotation next year, or at least get some minutes every game. And I think he's very likely to be a guy who is a meaningful part of their future. I am really high on Isaiah Jackson, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he brings next year. That's it for our player season recaps for the young bigs, the veteran bigs group of Turner, Sabonis, and Batadze. I'll do in the future. I'm not sure what the next one will be. The next one of these player season recaps will come on Friday. Tomorrow we'll start the free agency previews for Pacers players. I have not decided what player yet, but I will do the pros and cons of signing a player and then what I think will happen at the end, just to get the full picture of a player's free agency with the Pacers. Thursday, we'll do another draft prospect preview for one of the top 4 guys. TBD on if it'll be Chet or Banchero yet. And then Friday, again, we'll do another one of these position groups. I hope you guys like this style and this way of reviewing guys' seasons because I think it's very telling about what the Pacers ecosystem was and what it could be for these players going forward. So I hope everybody had a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.